We are joined by two gentlemen to discuss the proposed nationalization of the national carrier Kenya Airways by the National Assembly Transport Committee. On my immediate left is David Ojwang. He is the Chief Operations Officer at Silverstone Air. And on my far left is Ken Gichinga. He is the Chief Economist Mentoria, and he's our resident analyst. Welcome on set, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Maybe we can just start off there. What does nationalization of the national carrier mean?
Well, good morning and thank you for having me. I think the key idea here is you have an asset that can be entirely private, right, or can be entirely public. If an asset, for example, the proposal here is to have Kenya Airways to be completely owned by the government of Kenya, that process of removing it from partially private hands into fully government hands, right, that process is called nationalization.
Right. And what does it mean for the aviation industry?
Well, it's a complicated issue with many layers. If you look at the aviation industry, you'll find some airlines that are fully nationalized, right, such as Air France, the Emirates, and you'll find that some others that are fully privatized, for example, Virgin Atlantic in the UK. What we have in Kenya, we used to have a fully nationalized airline, KQ, but in 1995, the process of privatization began. Right. And in 1996, we saw the listing of KQ on the stock exchange. So what does that really mean? It means now you have input not just from the Treasury, because the PS of Treasury sits on the board, but also you have input from shareholders. You and I can own shares at Kenya Airways. So what does that mean? I think that's the best model, because having some government input gives you access to government business, right, number one. Also having private sector input gives you efficiencies, it gives you creativity, it gives you innovation. So I've always thought of that hybrid model as the best. So for us to go back again to being completely nationalized, I think, in my opinion, is going back to where we were in 1995. I'd rather we retain the hybrid model that we have right now. Right.
You're saying we'd rather retain the hybrid model that we have right now. David, bringing you into the conversation, what do you think about the nationalization proposal?
Well, thank you for having me this morning in this panel.
Welcome.
I'll echo what my fellow economist just said. Because once nationalization is just kept to government issue or government ownership, it will not be efficient the way he has just mentioned it. So keeping it whereby private sector owns and then the government sector also owns it, then it means efficiency will be there.
Right. Yeah. But as it is, the national carrier is nearly bankrupt. Yeah. What do you think nationalization is supposed to solve?
Well, in this case, nationalization to solve this will be a bit minimal, and that's where now us as private sector, especially, and I'm not saying that I'm happy with what is happening with KQ. That's where we now become in handy, because in this business is about competition. Right. And here we come in with the OTP, which means on-time performance. We provide a good travel airfare for the Kenyans. And this means that tourism, we're going to enhance tourism. We enhance the business. We also enhance what is called air experience for those Kenyans who have not tested the air transport. Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, if you look at the parliamentary paper that was tabled in Parliament, I believe a couple of days ago, that gave the motivation for the process of nationalization. Right. It's about 66 pages long, and it starts off by saying that Jomo Kenyatta Airport is losing its status as the hub of East Africa, and it's losing it to Ethiopian Airlines. And they even go far as quoting the numbers. They say KQ has 53 routes, while Ethiopian Airlines has 153 routes. KQ has about 40 aircrafts. Ethiopian Airlines has 100 aircrafts. So they look at that history and they say, if we don't do anything, Jomo Kenyatta is likely to lose its position as the transit point, the hub of East Africa.
Right.
And so their proposal, and they draw heavily from Qatar Airlines and from Emirates Airlines, which are highly supported by their state.
Right.
And to make that argument that maybe we should follow that model of Qatar and Emirates to get to a fully nationalized outcome. The problem, though, is when you limit yourself to those two airlines, you forget a lot of lessons learned from the problems of nationalization. And I think maybe that's where the shortcoming in that report. It doesn't compare other jurisdictions, so that, because these two countries have high amounts of fuel, they have high amounts of state support. So it's, even if Kenya Airways was nationalized, it would be impossible to get that kind of level of support. So I think that's where the shortcoming in the report was.
Right. Welcome back. You are watching Newscheck. Now, we were just having a discussion here on the matters of nationalization of the Kenya Airways. That is a proposal by the National Transport Committee. They are proposing that Kenya Airways be nationalized and all ownership goes to the government. And on set is Ken Gichinga, rather. He's chief economist at Mentoria, as well as David Ojwang, the chief operations officer at Silverstone Air. Thank you, of course, for your company.
Thank you.
Yes, let's just pick up let's first of all delve into the discussion that government spokesperson just had about the Lamu coal power plant. We can start right there. What do you think about the move to venture into coal mining in Kenya?
Well, first of all, let me first congratulate the government on this idea of weekly briefing. I think it's very important for the country that every week we hear from the government on its position. That was not there. And there was a time that was creating some anxiety. And I think this is very good. That said, moving forward, I think on the Lamu coal power plant, he's highlighted the advantages of it. He said it's cheaper. It's about 7 US cents per kilowatt hour. If you compare with geothermal, which is about 8 cents. He also talked about how it will be used for desalinating the ocean waters. So I think he's brought out the advantages very well. I wish he also brought out the challenges in as much in a similar vigor, because it has environmental challenges which have been raised both officially and on the streets. So I wish he had brought those out to create a more balanced opinion for the public. But in the sense that Lamu, when LAPSET was created, the idea was Lamu was supposed to be a key cog in tourism. It has the deepest berths, the port. It was supposed to be the connection point towards many cities in the northern frontier. So I really hope we don't lose sight of that. Yes, we do need energy. He says the country needs energy, but the world is moving towards clean energy. Even the countries he's quoted, such as the US. Coal energy is a very, very political issue. Even in the 2016 election, it was one of the areas that actually cost Hillary Clinton her views on that and on that. So it's not something that, even if you quote these advanced economies, it's not an issue that is settled by any means. It's a matter that is highly contentious, and I think it's important. As Africa, we don't have any legacy projects like in the West. So it's better if we can start on clean energy right from the get-go. I think for me, that would be the best. But that is the position that they have had.
Right. He said that the energy that we are going to use through coal is a bit greener than what we know, and that the public is misinformed. And yesterday, the principal secretary in charge of mining, John Omenge, said that he spoke tough about the activists who are against this particular issue, and said that they have not done enough benchmarking and they don't know what is happening in the rest of the world. What are your thoughts on that yourself, sir?
Having said that, I think as much as we are looking into positive effect that is the coal energy is gonna bring to Kenyan economy, the disadvantage of green or the clean energy is very vital here. Okay, whereas like local aviationists, will enjoy, of course, traffic from Wilson or from other regions to go and do business with the Lamu residents. But see, on the other effect, what is important also is the clean, of course, environment, even for our proper operations.
Right. Yeah. All right. And just focusing still on that particular issue, he said that we are targeting 5,000 megawatts. This will produce 1,000 megawatts. Is it feasible?
Well, the long-term picture is to have 10,000 megawatts by the year 2030. Now, as of yesterday, that was scaled down to about 7,000. Much of which, of course, will be hydroelectric, geothermal, and solar. If this can plug in that's a huge amount. And it can create jobs. Coal mining across the world has created jobs, and unemployment is a big problem, especially in the coastal area. So it does create jobs, but I think as economists, we look at both the negatives and the positives, and we come up with what is called a balance of evidence. And I think for us, I wish we had seen the feasibility study to be able to really assess. I think these are the documents they should be sharing with the public for us to make sort of like a deeper assessment. But it does have its advantages and its disadvantages.
He also spoke about public participation, that was done. There's a general feeling that public participation is not as public as it should be, really. So what are your thoughts on that, public participation?
I think government is just trying to justify their case. Because if at all public, they shared information with the public properly, and public are well sensitized, I think this hullabaloo of contradicting each other would have been minimized.
All right. Yourself?
Yeah, I think this issue of public participation, that word needs to be thoroughly understood what it means, because it came up again with the new currency, when the CBK said there was public participation, and other people said they were not as involved as they should have been. So, in a sense, we need to understand what exactly, what meets the minimum threshold of public participation. Should you put up an advert in the papers with dates on when this meeting should have, or is there a more nuanced way when you can have public participation without involving the greater public? I think that's the reason we have this kind of, anytime something new comes up, we have this kind of contestations between two parties. But that said, I think everybody is alive to the fact that Kenya wants to industrialize. He mentioned that coal is a key part of industrialization, but also what Kenyans have chosen in the new constitution was to have access to a clean environment. And I think both have to be taken with equal weight in this particular discussion.
Of course, focusing on clean energy.
Exactly.
Okay, we now move on to the issue that we were discussing about the nationalization of Kenya Airways. David, you are a player in the aviation industry. Will this have any effect to the private sector?
Yeah, well, if our competitor, who is the mother of aviation industry in Kenya, if they don't really work it well, of course, the beneficiary will be us. Because normally, just like maybe in jungle law or in the forest, you find that when the hyena hands the prey, whatever is left is for the hyenas. I'm not saying here we are the hyenas, but you see, it's a give and take thing. Actually, it will be the solution to the problem. And as at now, we are still the solution in that we make sure that we are very efficient in our operations, and actually in all the destinations that we are ventured into. So far, we've been getting contribution messages from our customers. Yeah, be it Ukunda, be it Lamu, be it Kisumu, be it Malindi, and recently we did launch a Eldoret route, and we are getting enough satisfaction, and actually it's even in the business daily papers.
Good for you. Okay. Now, about the holding company that was being proposed, one of the things that the committee said is that it will sort out the strike issues by the employees, and the workers' union, the aviation workers' union, actually supported this. Do you think that will happen?
Well, you really say the devil is in the detail, because once you have created a holding company, it means all the employees of Jomo Kenyatta Airport will be seconded to that bigger holding company. What are the benefits? What are the challenges that come with that? I think for me, we are getting caught up in too much in the structure, and you're forgetting that it's not really the structure per se, it's the service delivery. You can have a purely public entity that's delivering, and you can have a purely private entity. I flew KQ on Monday to Mombasa. The flight was cancelled 3 times. And returning back from Mombasa to Nairobi, it was cancelled 3 times. So for me, it's not even a question of what's the best type of structure. You know, things like delays should just not be there because it inconveniences people. So I think this report is based on the assumption that if you have a better structure, if you have a national structure, you'll have more efficiency. But actually, you'll realize more and more privatization happens to increase efficiency. It's not the other way around. So I think sometimes these structures, the debate is so much more on the structure than on what's the end game. And the end game is to have a vibrant national airline, and I've not seen their strategic plan, and I think that's where the answer has to be. What is the strategic plan that will be implemented once this new structure is unveiled? Because if it's a poor strategic plan, it doesn't matter how good of a structure you have.
Right. Of course, it's ultimately about the customer service. What gets to the customer
and the
that will retain them there.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. That is something that maybe private organizations are doing quite a much better job than the national carrier.
And it's easy to understand why, because the levels of decision making in government are very many. In the private sector, it's just one call away to the CEO and something is fixed.
Right,
so private entities have that advantage that the turnaround time is much shorter. If there's a delay on a flight, just really a quick call. With the purely national system, it might have to go all the way to the Ministry of Transport.
That's right.
You know, and maybe to get him might be an issue. So I think that's why at the beginning of this interview I said I wish we could see a more public-private ownership in the way it is right now. Safaricom has used that very well, and I think KQ can use that as it is as well. Yeah.
All right. What do you think about the public-private partnerships?
Yeah, public-private partnership, actually that's the way to go, because just like they also mentioned earlier, you know, public has his own expertise, he has his own experience, and his own way they will advise the KQ to be run. And private also the same thing. And you see, with those things, with this two rich set of mind, when they are fused together, really will come up with a more pronounced and informed decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the market of the aviation industry.
Yeah.
The number of domestic landings, according to an economic survey of 2019, increased by 6.7%, while the number of domestic takeoffs increased by 8.3%. Now, the share of domestic aircraft movements increased slightly from 58.7%, which is still a huge chunk, to 59.2% in 2017. That means domestic air travel is growing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's growing exponentially. What is driving this growth?
One, I mentioned earlier, in everything that customer looks at, one is service delivery. Secondly, is the pricing.
Right.
I think those are the major, and of course trying to understand the market destinations. Like you'll find that of late, like of course in Eldoret, why we were pushed to open the Eldoret route mostly, in our survey, because we have a very enhanced marketing team. I found that Eldoret town is a town that's now really growing, and we felt that we should be also part of its growth. That's why we introduced a direct flight from Wilson to Eldoret, and actually we are doing it twice a week. You'll find that, and we've pegged our timing for convenience. In that, if you have a business, for example, in Eldoret, leaving Nairobi, will be leaving Nairobi at around 7:15 in the morning. And actually, it's a flight that takes about 45 minutes. By around 8:10, 8:15, you are in Eldoret, and we're able to transact your businesses there during the day, and in the evening also you come back to Nairobi. That is your base in Nairobi, and vice versa. So that's it. And of course, in terms of like now, Kenya is now experiencing this. We are going towards tourism season now, whereby now we are expecting tourists from other destinations of the world. This one also prompted us also to now open Mara route. We had opened it earlier, but right now we are now full to it, whereby we are having daily flights now twice a week, twice a day. Same to it, Mombasa, we are also having two flights a week, not 2 flights daily. And of course, Kisumu, we also have daily flights. Morning, two flights daily, but Friday and Sundays we have 3 flights. And actually, we are proud to say that we are the first airline to have commenced direct flight from Kisumu to Mombasa.
Right.
Yeah, which we do twice a week.
Right.
Yeah.
Gichinga, what is the impact of these, the likes of Silverstone and other local airlines to tourism in Kenya, local tourism?
I think they are going to make it very vibrant. As David has said, you're moving from new flights, new routes like Ukunda to Kisumu.
Right.
There's no such route that the bigger airlines that have that. So I think what the smaller airlines have is they have access to innovation, and
Right.
they're more nimble. So they're able, because of the decision-making process being shorter, they're more in tune with market realities. And that's what has happened in America. Actually, America has no national carrier. It used to have Pan American long time ago, but that went out of force. If we go to the US, it's purely the safari links that are connecting people from states to states. And that has made the air market there very vibrant. It's so cheap to fly from New York to Chicago because it's very, there are many flights. And I think that kind of vibrance is what we need to look at here. So that if the private sector can do it, let's encourage the private sector. So the government has more of an oversight role in making sure the safety standards are high, and more of the regulatory role. You know, in economics, is something called the principle of subsidiarity. What the higher body can do, the lower body should not do. So if private sector can do it very well, the government should, in a way, step out and look at the bigger picture on how to make Kenya a more enabling environment for new investors to come into the market. That's how you end up with a very vibrant economy.
Right. And let's talk about the pricing. Much as it's low cost, it's not as it's not cheap. It's low cost because of the high cost of air travel in Kenya.
Right.
I mean, if we would get to a point where you can spend maybe 10,000 shillings to Entebbe and back on a return ticket, that would be good. But yeah, it's not currently available. So when we talk about pricing, why is air cost very expensive, especially in Africa?
Well, I'm sure David is more of an expert here, but in my understanding, it's a volumes game, and it's traffic. So routes that have higher traffic, it's easier for airlines to reduce the cost because you have economies of scale. But you don't want to fly an aeroplane that's always half full all the time. It means you're not maximizing. So I think it's looking at, first of all, Kenyan businessmen doing a lot of business across Africa, and which are the cities they are going to the most. Then you prioritize those routes so that you always have aircrafts that are full. I think that is the basic economics to it, because if you remember when the KQ flights to New York, when they were launched last year, one of the biggest challenges was filling those flights to the point they had to reduce the number of flights from daily to about maybe 3 or 4 in a week. So that's where the economics really comes in.
What's your expert opinion?
Well, if you can add on what economist Gichinga has mentioned, is also the tool of trade. Like in this case, now the kind of also aircraft we are operating.
Right.
And of course, expertise involved. Like in our case, you find that our CEO, he himself is a captain. So he really understands the dynamics of an aircraft and also what it needs. So actually, it's a hands-on. The same way you say that decision making also play a role in this kind of penetrating market, local market. So you find that the kind of aircraft we maintain, you know that because they are sound and everything, very okay for the air safety and the air travel. But the cost, we will try to really manage the cost because we also have experienced technicians who check on these aircrafts, and to see where there is normally wastage here is operational cost. You find that we maximize and we make sure that we give aircraft what it requires. We don't give it what it doesn't require. And of course, we work in conformity with the regulatory body, which is KCAA. So we find that we really take measures into spares, running cost, and all that an aircraft need.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there sufficient personnel in the aviation industry?
Sorry?
Personnel in terms of technicians, what are they called? The aircraft, airworthiness people, just the personnel that are needed.
Yeah, Betty, before you start an airline, you know, you have to be audited, you have to be checked thoroughly.
Right.
And for example, where I'm saying we are proud that we are managing ourselves is that we have our own ammo. We're authorized by the KCA to maintain our own aircraft.
Right.
So that's where we really minimize any pilferages in case there's any, and we maximize cost on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What incentives can the government give to boost the local aviation industry?
Oh, well, I would say the incentive majorly is about taxation,
right,
and also efficiency. That when we need to conform to their policy, they act on our applications and our request first.
Right.
Yes.
What does the policy environment look like?
Policy environment, basically, okay, it's just normal because it conforms to the aviation policy worldwide.
Right.
But what I'm saying here is being efficient on executing aviation need.
Right.
Yes.
What are your thoughts, Gichinga?
I think we need to take advantage of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that is coming into place.
Right.
There'll be a lot of labor mobility, capital mobility, and it's part of the Open Skies initiatives is really to be able to have one African continent, and you can move from Nairobi to Dakar the way somebody would move from New York to LA.
Right.
I think we need that kind of viability. But for that to happen, we need to allow different types of players to come in.
Right.
You can have the high-end elite players coming in, but if you look at advanced economies such as the UK, you have the likes of EasyJet, which is very, very low cost. It's $10, $20, you know, to France and things like that. I don't think we've gotten to that level yet, where you can go to your Entebbe for 5,000 shillings.
Right.
So I think there's a whole layer yet that we're yet to get into. But increasing vibrance, increasing number of tourists. Last year we had 2 million tourists coming to Kenya, and that really helped the industry.
Right.
I think those are the things that will create an experience where people can choose what they call a no-frills experience, where you pay the very little. Sometimes even the cashew nuts that you pay on board is charged.
Right.
Or you can have your very high-end, elite, first-class experiences.
Right.
I think that's what Kenyans want, a differentiated, depending on where that your pocket can afford.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone's pocket should be able to fly them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Now, you've mentioned the open sky policy. In East Africa, it's yet to be operationalize because it's only Kenya and Rwanda that signed that agreement. So we are yet to get there in East Africa. But basically, the Kenya Airways were saying that this open sky policy has messed up their profits. Is that true?
I've always thought KQ's #1 competitive advantage was it has a lot of African destinations.
Right.
Yes, it's good to have routes such as New York or London, but I think KQ's main benefit was to really help business travelers from Kenya go to Bujumbura, go to Lusaka, go to Cape Town. I really think that is where it can have a competitive advantage over other airlines like Emirates or Qatar, for example. I don't think that's the cause for their loss of their profit. I think the reason they are not doing very well, for me, it's still been around the management part.
Right.
I think there's still management challenges. Obviously, the current CEO has said that he's stepping down, and obviously that points to a lot of challenges in that particular desk.
Right.
So I really feel that is where it is. I don't think it's in the Pan-African strategy, because everything is pointing towards more growth in Pan-African trade, Pan-African movement. So it's impossible to say that that is the reason that you're making a loss.
Right, but they are saying that it's because of the increased competition that is now taking some of their destinations, and also the management of JKIA.
Well, competition will always be there, and that's the reason this particular public-private partnership is very useful, because that private segment should give you more innovation. Because KQ, the pricing has not been competitive. There was a time flying from Nairobi to Dar es Salaam would cost you 84,000 shillings. believe it or not. And that's a 1 hour, 20-hour flight. Yeah. So obviously, if other players come in, they'll take your market.
Definitely.
So it's very important that they look at their price component. A lot of people love flying KQ, but they say their prices are just
too high.
It's very, very high, especially for intra-African trade where you're only flying 2 hours away, 3 hours away. So I think that's the reason that when competitors come in, they feel their market share is taken away. So they need to look at what is it that makes their cost operations so expensive. Is it high packages, high salaries? They need to address that part and make themselves internally competitive. And once they do that, no other competition will be able to take them on. But if you're charging 84,000 at that time to Dar es Salaam, any new player will come in and take your whole market share easily.
Right.
Yeah.
The whole point of the open sky policy was to even bring down the pricing and to do away with some unnecessary taxes that are charged. For instance, in the EU markets, it's guided by strict controls of public subsidies by, of course, airlines both internally and externally. In African states are yet to do that. Are we ever getting there? I mean, it took a whole 30 years for it to be signed. How long will it take for us to now see the benefits?
I think the challenge in Africa is a lot of the countries still want a national airline because it embodies their national aspirations. If you look at a country such as Ghana, Ghana used to have Ghana Airways, which collapsed some time back. So they're trying to revive it, even Uganda. So in that interest of trying to nurture their national airlines, obviously they'll try and create a protective environment. And that's why maybe things like open skies to them might not be interesting to them right now, because in the process of nurturing, it's almost like part of a nationhood project. And I think as long as that is a prevailing sentiment, it's unlikely that we'll get open skies. But I think in the fullness of time, they realize what people really want is to move from point A to point B in an efficient way. It doesn't really matter if it's Ugandan or Rwandan. You just want to be able to make your appointment on time. That's what happens. So I think in the fullness of time, we'll see that policy being adopted. But as of now, I think there's a high sense of nationalism that is sort of like making that discussion a bit more difficult.
David, what are your thoughts on the open sky policy?
Well, open sky policy is something that we are far from reaching, because you will find that this open sky policy, I would say it has affected Kenya Airways' performance in a way. Like see now this Ethiopian Airways. Right now, you see, it comes and lands at a Boy International Airport. When it lands there, most of the time, tourists, it picks tourists from there. So the issue of like blocking it from coming from Nairobi, it doesn't have any impact. Instead, it is creating it's absorbing more business share for Kenyan market. And for me, right now, it's something that the government should really see how to tap it and control it.
Is there a balance?
I would say right now there is no proper balance.
What is the way to getting there, to getting to that balance?
Way to get to that balance is, first of all, I think control measures should be put, and therefore I think Kenya Airways itself, or in this case, actually should really sit and know where is not doing right. Then from there it will help it focus well.
It will help it focus well. Of course, improving efficiency at Kenya Airways and nationalization might just be it could be the solution, but it might fail.
I think for me, I'm more in favor of creating a competitive environment. Sometimes we look at competition negatively, but what competition actually does, it helps you focus on your advantage. What's your competitive advantage? If a new player comes in and takes in a route that was yours, it actually allows you to allocate your resources to the destinations that you're most competitive. So I think for me, yes, you might look at it, yes, we've lost a route, but we've gained in terms we've now redirected our routes to other places where we have a competitive advantage. So it gives people a lot more options, a lot more connections. So for me, it is a good thing, and we need to encourage having a more competitive airspace.
Let's talk about the infrastructure for the aviation industry. Most counties do not have any place where a plane can land, so to say. Will improving or even just total construction of new airstrips in various counties, how will that impact domestic tourism?
Well, if I may answer that, you see, infrastructure is the mother of everything.
Right.
Because without infrastructure, development is strained. Why am I saying this? Now, is because you will find that there are so many airstrips, unmanned airstrips, especially in Kenya, that limits different kind of aircraft.
Right.
Like you see now, and this one now, when you now is a customer vis-a-vis the service. Why am I saying this is that you'll find that aircraft may be leaving from Kitale airstrip. No, they are a bit small kind of aircraft. And not because it's controlled by the airship that is there, because there was this runway, it dictates the kind of aircraft that lands there. And you see, for a person who has never experienced an aircraft travel, when you see that small aircraft, you know, the fear is more pronounced than when it's in a caravan or a dash or a Fokker or a jet. Right. Yeah, so once you create and you enhance the faith and strengthen the customer, then this one will facilitate or will make the clients, the travel easier. You see, like Kabunde, basically in Eldoret, in Homa Bay, we cannot accept larger aircraft, but still find that the most of people, clients that would travel to Western Circuit, they're in Kakamega, Bungoma, Homa Bay, and Kisii, and of course Migori. Right. They're the people who form major chunk of Kisumu travel. So if that airstrip can be improved, I'm not saying it's bad offer, it can be improved and the runway expands a bit, then you'll find that there'll be more traffic, and actually we'll even increase the more frequency going to western part of it. Right. And infrastructure plays a big role in the aviation industry.
Right. Yeah. How can the counties come in to support this industry?
If you look at an example such as Nakuru, Nakuru, one of their strategies is to have an international airport there. Nakuru is one of the fastest growing counties, fastest growing cities in Kenya. So I think a place like that would tremendously benefit, because think of all the agricultural produce that Nakuru grows. It has to come to Nairobi. That's a transport cost. It has to be stored at Jomo Kenyatta before it's exported to Europe. Now imagine if you could have a direct flight straight to Amsterdam. That would reduce cost, it would reduce time, increase profit. So I think counties, especially counties that have a major commerce sector, this is Nakuru, Kisumu, even Isiolo. It is a very strategic location because it's close to Nanyuki, close to Mount Kenya, close to Laikipia. I think if we can enhance these airports, you'll find a lot more traffic. You know, the country of Norway is a very small country, but it has 52 airports, you know, and that has contributed to a lot of wealth for the country. Now, Kenya, I think we need that. If you look at economic growth in Kenya, you can actually draw an arc between Kisumu down to Mombasa. That's where economic activity happens. If you look at the northern frontier, which is the largest, nothing happens.
Pretty silent.
Yes, but there's a lot of tourism in Marsabit, tourism in Turkana. Turkana should have a very nice place for aircrafts to bring tourists there. So counties, it's not a devolved function, but they can really influence, they can play a major role in lobbying the Secretary of Transport to be able to consider those hubs. Right,
that means there's a lot of untapped potential in this industry.
Huge untapped potential, huge.
And what would it take, even as much as lobbying from the county governments, what would it take the national government to tap this potential?
Well, the first thing is they are upgrading some of these towns to become cities. So these towns are getting now city recognition.
Right.
So we should have something in the constitution that says for you to have city status, you need to have an international airport. So that will really push a lot of these counties to look at what can we do to become a city. What are the things? And that comes with an airport. So I think it pushes the governors to improve ways of doing business in the county, to attract investors, because those are the things that you need. You don't want to have an idle airport.
Right.
You want to have a very vibrant airport. So I think making that amendment where you can't have a city status, part of being a city status is having an international airport, I think would go a long way towards,
Right. And you mentioned about the markets and the produce, getting the produce to the market. Of course, there are parts of this country that have surplus in surplus produce, and there are others that lack. Would maybe working on these infrastructure in counties even help to get this produce from the surplus areas to other areas? What do you think?
Yeah, well, that one will be handy because, for example, you'll find that if I may say now in Kisumu, when I talk of now fishing, we'll find that fishing in Kisumu is not really supplying. Or if there's fish there, it's so much expensive. And if there will be like that inter-county connectivity in terms of airline, you'll find that maybe fish from Lodwar will, of course, supply maybe in Nairobi, any other county, because now finally people now believe in good healthy eating, and you see white meat is a good component of healthy living. So with this one, once this infrastructure is put into place and policy is put well, I think the surplus can be well balanced with other regions.
What are your thoughts, Gichinga?
Absolutely. I think the reason the crisis we saw last year was we saw places that are food abundant, and there are places where people were dying, and they were saying the lack of infrastructure was preventing. I don't think airport infrastructure would be the one that would cure that problem. I think it would be more of road transport, because at the end of the day, to go to a marketplace, it's really the pickups and lorries that go to the marketplaces. But an airport would actually simplify things in the case of like emergencies. For example, a place where helicopters can land and deploy, even things such as terrorism, that time for the Garissa attacks. You remember how we had such a big problem in deploying aeroplanes to the Garissa attack. Had we had something there that was close by, that maybe that attack would have much fewer fatalities than it did. So airports can play a role in security, can play a role in food security, national security, as well as improving the state of commerce in those areas.
And maybe what is the outlook of the aviation industry now, maybe in the next 1 year or so? What are we expecting to see?
Well, the reports that I've seen don't talk about 1 year. They tend to look at 5 years, 10 years. And they're saying we're going to have the need for air transport will be huge over the next 10 years because of policies such as the Africa for Continental Free Trade Initiative, all these things. So I think the outlook is very bright. There's been talk about safety, increasing safety standards to make sure that all is well. But I think if you look at the population of Africa, the population of Kenya, we are now at 50 million people. Population of Africa, we are at 1 billion people. How many inter-Africa businesses are opening up? In the hundreds. So I think it's huge, and it's up to the players to come up with low-cost, high-value propositions.
I think Gichinga has said it all. And we intend to grow because from the time we started this meeting, you mentioned that local, of course, tourism, local flights has increased, and of course domestically, and we intend it for it to increase further. And because now, actually, even the local players in aviation, they are really now key. Actually, before at Wilson Airport, it was only KQ and of course Jambojet. Right now at Wilson alone, you have various numbers of players that now applies to different destinations. And more are yet to still to come. So it means that it's really growing. Of course, the Kenyan know they're also seeing the essence now of traveling by air because of the consideration that we've offered to the market in terms of fare.